Welcome to tonight's story time. We are continuing with the Grimm's fairy tale. Tonight's story is Briar Rose, and then we'll be reading The Dog, and the Sparrow. But first things first, Briar Rose. A king and queen, once upon a time, reigned in a country a great way off, where there were, in those days, fairies. Now this king and queen had plenty of money and plenty of fine clothes to wear, and plenty of good things to eat and drink, and a coach to ride out in every day. But though they had been married many, many years, they had no children, and this grieved them very much indeed. But one day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river, at the bottom of the garden, she saw a poor little fish that had thrown itself out of the water and lay gasping and nearly dead on the bank. Then the queen took pity on the little fish and threw it back again into the river, and before it swam away, it lifted its head out of the water and said, "I know what your wish is, and it shall be fulfilled. In return for your kindness to me, you will soon have a daughter." What the little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen had a little girl, so very beautiful that the king could not cease looking on it for joy, and said he would hold a great feast and make merry, and show the child to all the land. So he asked his kinsmen and nobles and friends and neighbors. But the queen said, "I will have the fairies also, that they might be kind and good to our little daughter." Now there were 13 fairies in the kingdom, but as the king and queen had only 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of, they were forced to leave one of the fairies without asking her. So 12 fairies came, each with a high red cap on her head and red shoes with high heels on her feet, and a long white wand in her hand. And after the feast was over, they gathered round in a ring and gave all their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her goodness, another beauty, another riches, and so on till she had all that was good in the world. Just as 11 of them had done blessing her, a great noise was heard in the courtyard, and word was brought that the 13th fairy was come, with a black cap on her head, and black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand. and presently up she came into the dining hall. Now, as she had not been asked to the feast, she was very angry and scolded the king and queen very much, and set to work to take her revenge. So she cried out, "The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead." And the 12th of the friendly fairies, who had not yet given her gift, came forward and said that the evil wish must be fulfilled, but that she could soften his mischief. So her gift was that the king's daughter, when the spindle wounded her, should not really die, but should only fall asleep for 100 years. However, the king hoped still to save his dear child altogether from the threatened evil. So he ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom shall be bought up and burnt. But all the gifts of the first 11 fairies were in the meantime fulfilled. For the princess was so beautiful and well behaved and good and wise that everyone who knew her loved her. It happened that on the very day she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and she was left alone in the palace. So she roved about by herself and looked at all the rooms and chambers, till at last she came to an old tower, to which there was a narrow staircase ending with a little door. In the door there was a golden key, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there sat an old lady spinning away very busily. "Hi, how now, good mother," said the princess. "What are you doing there?" "Spinning," said the old lady. She nodded her head, humming a tune, while Buzz went the wheel. "How prettily that little thing turns around," said the princess, and took the spindle and began to try and spin. But scarcely had she touched it before the fairy's prophecy was fulfilled. The spindle wounded her, and she fell down lifeless on the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep sleep, and the king and the queen, who had just come home, and all their court fell asleep too. And the horses slept in the stables, and the dogs in the court, the pigeons on the housetop, and the very flies slept upon the walls. Even the fire on the hearth left off blazing and went to sleep. The jack stopped, and the spit that was turning about with the goose upon it for the king's dinner stood still. And the cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box on the ear for something he had done amiss, let him go, and both fell asleep. The butler, who was slyly tasting the ale, fell asleep with the jug at his lips, and thus everything stood still and slept soundly. A large hedge of thorns soon grew round the palace, and every year it became higher and thicker, till at last the old palace was surrounded and hidden, so that not even the roof or the chimneys could be seen. But there went a report through all the land of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the king's daughter was called, so that from time to time several kings' sons came and tried to break through the thicket into the palace. This, however, none of them could ever do, for the thorns and bushes laid hold of them, as it were with hands, and there they stuck fast and died wretchedly. After many, many years, there came a king's son into that land, and an old man told him the story of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, and how a wonderful princess called Briar Rose lay in it asleep with all her court. He told, too, how he had heard from his grandfather that many, many princes had come and had tried to break through the thicket, but that they had all stuck fast in it and died. Then the young prince said, "All this shall not frighten me. I will go and see this Briar Rose." The old man tried to hinder him, but he was bent upon going. Now that very day 100 years were ended, and as the prince came to the thicket, he saw nothing but beautiful flowering shrubs, through which he went with ease, and they shut in after him as thick as ever. Then he came at last to the palace, and there in the court lay the dogs asleep, and the horses were standing in the stables, and on the roof sat the pigeons fast asleep, with their heads under their wings. And then he came into the palace. The flies were sleeping on the walls. The spit was standing still. The butler had the jug of ale at his lips, going to drink a draught. The maid sat with a fowl in her lap, ready to be plucked, and the cook in the kitchen was still holding up her hand as if she was going to beat the boy. Then he went on still farther, and all was so still that he could hear every breath he drew, till at last he came to the old tower, and opened the door of the little room in which Briar Rose was, and there she lay, fast asleep, on a couch by the window. She looked so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off of her, so he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But the moment he kissed her, she opened her eyes and awoke, and smiled upon him, and they went out together, and soon the king and queen also awoke, and all the court, and gazed on each other with great wonder. And the horses shook themselves, and the dogs jumped up and barked. The pigeons took their heads from under their wings, and looked about, and flew into the fields. The flies on the walls buzzed again. The fire in the kitchen blazed up. Round went the jack, and round went the spit, with the goose for the king's dinner upon it. The butler finished his draught of ale. The maid went on plucking the fowl, and the cook gave the boy the box on his ear. Then the prince and Briar Rose were married, and the wedding feast was given, and they lived happily together all their lives long. This one is called The Dog and the Sparrow. The shepherd's dog had a master who took no care of him, but often let him suffer the greatest hunger. At last he could bear it no longer, so he took to his heels, and off he ran in a very sad and sorrowful mood. On the road he met a sparrow that said to him, "Why are you so sad, my friend?" "Because," said the dog, "I am very, very hungry and have nothing to eat." "If that be all," answered the sparrow, "come with me into the next town, and I will soon find you plenty of food." So on they went together into the town, and as they passed by a butcher's shop, the sparrow said to the dog, "Stand there a little while till I peck you down a piece of meat." So the sparrow perched upon the shelf, and having first looked carefully about her to see if anyone was watching her, she pecked and scratched at a steak that lay upon the edge of the shelf, till at last down it fell. Then the dog snapped it up and scrambled away with it into a corner, where he soon ate it all up. "Well," said the sparrow, "you shall have some more, if you will. So come with me to the next shop, and I will peck you down another steak." When the dog had eaten this too, the sparrow said to him, "Well, my good friend, have you had enough now?" "I have had plenty of meat," answered he, "but I should like to have a piece of bread to eat after it." "Come with me then," said the sparrow, "and you shall soon have that too." So she took him to a baker's shop, and pecked at 2 rolls that lay in the window, till they fell down, and as the dog still wished for more, she took him to another shop, and pecked down some more for him. When that was eaten, the sparrow asked him whether he had had enough now. "Yes," said he, "and now let us take a walk a little way out of the town." So they both went out upon the high road, but as the weather was warm, they had not gone far before the dog said, "I am very much tired. I should like to take a nap." "Very well," answered the sparrow, "do so, and in the meantime I will perch upon that bush." So the dog stretched himself out on the road and fell fast asleep. Whilst he slept, there came by a carter with a cart drawn by 3 horses and loaded with 2 casks of wine. The sparrow, seeing that the carter did not turn out of the way, but would go on in the track in which the dog lay, so as to drive over him, called out, "Stop, stop, Mr. Carter, or it shall be the worse for you." But the carter, grumbling to himself, "You make it the worse for me, indeed. What can you do?" cracked his whip and drove his cart over the poor dog, so that the wheels crushed him to death. "There," cried the sparrow, "thou cruel villain, thou hast killed my friend the dog. Now mind what I say, This deed of thine shall cost thee all thy worth. Do your worst and welcome, said the brute. What harm can you do me? And passed on. But the sparrow crept under the tilt of the cart and pecked at the bung of one of the casks till she loosened it, and then all the wine ran out without the carter seeing it. At last he looked around and saw that the cart was dripping and the cask quite empty. What an unlucky wretch I am, cried he. Not wretch enough yet, said the sparrow. She alighted upon the head of one of the horses and pecked at him till he reared up and kicked. When the carter saw this, he drew out his hatchet and aimed a blow at the sparrow, meaning to kill her, but she flew away, and the blow fell upon the poor horse's head with such force that he fell down dead. Unlucky wretch that I am, cried he. Not wretch enough yet, said the sparrow, and as the carter went on with the other 2 horses, she again crept under the tilt of the cart and pecked out the bung of the second cask, so that all the wine ran out. When the carter saw this, he again cried out, Miserable wretch that I am. But the sparrow answered, Not wretch enough yet, and perched on the head of a second horse and pecked at him too. The carter ran up and struck at her again with his hatchet, but away she flew, and the blow fell upon the second horse and killed him on the spot. Unlucky wretch that I am, said he. Not wretch enough yet, said the sparrow, and perching upon the third horse, she began to peck him too. The carter was mad with fury, and without looking about him, or caring what he was about, struck again at the sparrow, but killed his third horse as he had done the other 2. Alas, miserable wretch that I am, cried he. Not wretch enough yet, answered the sparrow as she flew away. Now I will plague and punish thee at thy own house. The carter was forced at last to leave his cart behind him and to go home overflowing with rage and vexation. Alas, said he to his wife, what ill luck has befallen me. My wine is all spilled, my horses all 3 dead. Alas, husband, replied she, and a wicked bird has come into the house, and has brought with her all the birds in the world, I am sure, and they have fallen upon our corn in the loft, and are eating it up with such a rate. Away ran the husband upstairs, and saw thousands of birds sitting upon the floor eating up his corn, with the sparrow in the midst of them. Unlucky wretch that I am, cried the carter, for he saw that the corn was almost all gone. Not wretch enough yet, said the sparrow. Thy cruelty shall cost thee thy life yet. And away she flew. The carter, seeing that he had thus lost all that he had, went down into his kitchen and was still not sorry for what he had done, but sat himself angrily and sulkily in the chimney corner. But the sparrow sat on the outside of the window and cried, "Carter, thy cruelty shall cost thee thy life." With that he jumped up in a rage, seized his hatchet, and threw it at the sparrow, but it missed her and only broke the window. The sparrow now hopped in, perched upon the window seat, and cried, "Carter, it shall cost thee thy life." Then he became mad and blind with rage, and struck the window seat with such force that he cleft it in two. And as the sparrow flew from place to place, the carter and his wife were so furious that they broke all their furniture, glasses, chairs, benches, the table, and at last the walls, without touching the bird at all. In the end, however, they caught her, and the wife said, "Shall I kill her at once?" "No," cried he, "that is letting her off too easily. She shall die a much more cruel death. I will eat her." But the sparrow began to flutter and stretch out her neck and cried, "Carter, it shall cost thee thy life yet." With that he could wait no longer, so he gave his wife the hatchet and cried, "Wife, strike at the bird and kill her in my hand." And the wife struck, but she missed her aim and hit her husband on the head so that he fell down dead, and the sparrow flew quietly home to her nest.